May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart bear witness to you of your great love and your mercy. Amen.
Amen.
That song chokes me up.
High school days.
Yes. The gospel for today is delivered by Jesus on a mountaintop. If you'll indulge me for a moment, please close your eyes just for a moment and think of a time that you were on the mountaintop, or a vista that overlooked the mountains below and above. Okay, you can open. What did you see? Anyone want to share what you saw? Waterfall? Awesome.
Snow.
Snow. Okay.
Eagles.
Eagles. You have a great view on the mountaintop. You maybe saw an ocean below, or a valley, or the sky above, where you mentioned the eagles. The beauty was all around you, and if you weren't afraid of heights, you might have felt on top of the world. Maybe inspired, motivated, challenged, or maybe empowered to do something great, or possibly frightening, or life-changing. Powerful. Power. Isn't that what the Jews were looking for in a Messiah? Power. This is where we begin examining the Beatitudes. The disciples were sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to the Sermon on the Mount, a place of great vision and experiencing a great connection with God, specifically the Son of God. Jesus told them what the kingdom of heaven looks like and his vision of life in that kingdom. What we find out is that it's a kingdom turned upside down. It's a kingdom where the meek will inherit the earth, and the poor in spirit will be blessed. Really? Was that what the Jews wanted? Is that what we want? Generally, the human condition wants a life that's easy, straightforward, with reward, I hate to admit, a bit of power and control. Once again, this adventure in following Jesus is going to be messy and contrary to societal norms then and now. Jesus laid out in the Beatitudes the principles for living in the kingdom of heaven. We, like the disciples, are invited to live these principles with the rewards now and throughout eternity. There are 8 Beatitudes. Each of the Beatitudes could be a separate sermon. Considering that fact, I hope that you brought lunch. Just kidding. I know that y'all are great at food, but no food delivery is coming today. I decided to pick one. And I was led today to focus today's sermon on, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Before we get into this specific beatitude, let's get to know more about the Beatitudes in general. Each of the Beatitudes begins with the word blessed. The gift of a blessing from God means the promise of well-being in the Old Testament. And specifically in the Old Testament, the word was barak. And it was associated with fertility. Fertility of crops, animals, humans, and provision for the future. The sign of the blessing in that time was prosperity in every form. In the New Testament, blessed takes a new turn. Adversity becomes the touchstone for blessing. Adversity, the touchstone for blessing. Are you ready to sign up for adversity in order to live out the Beatitudes? I don't know. Let's see. Jesus promises us God's favor, God's presence, God's love, God's provision in all times. The best of times and the worst of times. In my conversations with people over the years in hospitals, in rooms of 12-step programs, and in study groups, I've heard countless stories of people sharing the blessings that they've received as a result of what seemed at the time the worst thing that could have ever happened to them. Many times I hear the following: I would have done absolutely anything, and I mean anything, to not have gone through that experience. But now I am so grateful for that experience or problem. I could not be where I am today if that experience had not happened in my life. The blessing could not have occurred without the adversity. That's Jesus. His life, his death, and his resurrection. We'll hear that plea from Jesus to avoid the adversity on Maundy, Thursday, and it's in Matthew. If it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Surrender to the blessing. The first three Beatitudes describe the emptiness of the blessed person. The emptiness is followed by a hunger and thirst for righteousness, which means following the straight path. The last four demonstrate how a person relates to others. In mercy, which is the one we're focusing on today, in purity, in peacemaking, and the persecuted. So now for mercy. Mercy is to have empathy and show forgiveness and compassion for those in need. And let it begin with me. We obtain that mercy that is described in this beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy, through adversity, poor choices, and maybe admitting to spiritual bankruptcy. I would say, and definitely admitting to spiritual bankruptcy. We're all broken. Most of us like to think we're pretty good people. I like to be honest. After all, don't do that much wrong, right? Sorry, y'all. We're all flawed, and perhaps more than we think we are. Surrender to the blessing. It is the broken heart that has the space to receive mercy. A French theologian, Leon Bloy, says, "There are places in the heart that do not yet exist. Then suffering enters so that they may exist." Through the break in our hearts, God can enter and show us the mercy that we need and heal us so that we can be merciful to ourselves and to others. Mercy begets mercy. The first step is to surrender to our brokenness and our need for mercy. Through this awareness, we realize that every joy and every aspect and every upset of our life is part of the cycle of God's mercy. I remember a segment on Oprah one time that she thanks God every day for all of the good things that happen in her life, and thanks God for everything that she perceives as bad. She said that this simple exercise changed the view of her whole life. And she learned so much more from the situations that she perceived as bad than she did from the ones that she labeled good. God's mercy encompasses our whole life. When we can wake up every morning and be truly thankful for what we have in our lives, and our hearts are brimming over with love and mercy for our fellow travelers, then we're fully alive in God. And that is what he or she wants. What's a merciful person like? Some say that it's how the person acts in the world. The merciful reflect God's mercy in their relationships with others, in their giving of themselves to others in need, and the peace that they bring. A few days ago, a couple who are friends of ours were driving home from a wedding and stopped at Steak and Shake. They ordered food and drink at the counter to go, and they stood there and waited for the order. They stood near the cash register for a while and then sat down at the counter because it was taking a long time by fast food standards. The cashier came over and asked them if they had ordered. The answer was yes, and they were waiting for their food. She told them she'd go check on it. 5 minutes later, a bag showed up in front of them at the counter with food but no drinks. The man asked the cook in training for the drinks and excused himself to go to the restroom, thinking that the drinks would arrive in the meantime. His wife was getting very irritated. The coffee did arrive. She took a sip, and it was cold. She then asked the same cook in training if she could get a fresh cup of coffee, or if he could microwave the cold one. The apprentice cook brought over a server in training who sighed and said, "Okay, well, we'll have to make a whole new pot, and it'll take a while." By now, the woman is very upset. Her husband returned and sat down again at the counter, and she leaned over and said, "This is ridiculous. I just want a cup of coffee. I'm going to ask them to give it to us for free." Her husband puts his hand on her arm and says, "Honey, it can't take them that long to make a cup of coffee." She continued to fume, and after 5 minutes, her coffee arrived. By now, her husband, and she's been watching this, has eaten half of his sandwich. She checks the coffee. Well, they bring it to her, and it's hot. So she's got the coffee, and they get up from the counter to leave the restaurant. She again said to her husband, "I really want to ask them for my money back. The wait's been entirely too long." He responded by asking her to let it go. He turned toward the door and walked out of the restaurant, which further infuriated her. She got up from the counter, walked to the door, carrying her cup of coffee. It was hot, but the coffee is hot, and she is percolating. She gets to the door, turns around, turns toward the cashier, and suddenly she sees the full restaurant, which was hidden from her when her back was to the restaurant and when she was sitting at the counter. Every booth was full. There was a long line of people waiting for the cashier to either pay their checks or order food. There were only 2 servers, and that server in training. The woman stood there, mouth agape, and thought to herself, "There are only 2 servers here, and that poor girl in training, to attend to all of these people. They need more staff. Oh my goodness, no wonder it took so long to get a cup of coffee. They really need some help." She walked from the door back to the cashier, who had brought her the hot cup of coffee, and she said, "You all look so busy." The cashier replied, "Thank you for noticing and for your patience." The cashier could have just as well said, "Thank you for your mercy." The woman walked to the car and told her husband that she really liked the coffee and it hit the spot. Mercifully so. The story illustrates situations that happen to us every day. I heard your laughter, you may have related. When we see the whole picture, we move from irritated to merciful. I challenge you this week to look for these situations in your life and give those in turmoil more mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy. The cup of coffee was the woman's cup of mercy. Now, a cup of hot coffee is a first world problem. Our fellow Christians in other countries face food, hygiene, water, medical, and persecution challenges on a daily basis. We, on the other hand, are so blessed and more often face the coffee challenge rather than the water or persecution challenge. Blessed are the merciful. One of my favorite parables that describes mercy is that of the Good Samaritan. The parable demonstrates the 4 dimensions of mercy. A Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and he saw him. Mercy sees distress. When he saw him, he had compassion on him. Mercy responds internally with a heart of compassion towards those in distress. He went to him and bound his wounds, took him to the inn. Mercy responds with a demonstrated effort to relieve the distress. But a Samaritan, not the rabbi or the Levite, helps the Jew who hates him. Mercy acts even when the person is seen as unworthy or the enemy. Mercy sees the problem, responds with compassion, acts to relieve the problem, and treats each person with dignity. We at Emmanuel recently heard the story of Glenn and the prisoners, right? The prisoners were mowing the grass on the easements around the church, and he bought them donuts, which truly made their day, for which they were grateful, right? They were so grateful for the donuts that they came back to the church to ask if they could do something to help. Glenn said that we did need some help getting the old air handler out of the church. The officer said, "We'd be happy to do that, but because the church is on private property, they couldn't." And then Glenn replied to the officer, "This is God's property." Amazingly, the officer agreed with him. And the men came into the church and easily moved the air handler out of the building. Glenn's encounter with the prisoners exemplifies those 4 dimensions of mercy that I just talked about. He saw their work, recognized hunger, he responded with compassion, drove to purchase the donuts, responded with relief to the hunger, delivered the donuts. He acted even though the prisoners may be seen by others as unworthy, and you treated them with dignity. Moreover, his mercy was reciprocated. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Mercy is cyclical. When we recognize that we're broken and in need of mercy and ask for it, we're given that mercy. As a result of the gift, we can be merciful to ourselves and to others today, next week, and next month. In 12-step programs, one of the sayings that describes this cycle is, in order to keep it, you have to give it away. Paul tells us, having shown us mercy, Christ sends us out into the world to keep his mercy alive. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy and give it away. We can look at the prisoners mowing the lawn, or the family member who just doesn't seem to get it together, or the clerk or the server who is lacking, or the friend who's always late, and say, thank you, God, for recognizing our need for mercy. And then ask that in our interactions with those who we don't believe need mercy at that moment, to give it to us. And not only give it to us, but be able to demonstrate the compassion, the mercy, and the love that God has given each of us. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy and give it away. In a courtroom in North Carolina, a man stood before a judge to receive a sentence. The man, who was very poor, had stolen items to save, feed, and help his family. The judge and the man had gone to the same high school and had been friends. The man asked the judge for mercy. The judge charged the man with a full fine for the crime, knowing that he couldn't pay it. The judge struck the gavel with the sentence. The man looked at him and said, I can't pay that amount, and I am so sorry for what I've done. The judge got up from the bench, took off his robe, descended the stairs. He called over the bailiff, and he wrote a check for the fine and hugged the man. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy and give it away. We know the pain that we have had that has broken our hearts, and that God in His infinite mercy filled our broken heart with His love and forgiveness. We know the healing that has occurred in our own lives because of God's abounding and never-ending mercy. When we hand over to Him our unmerciful thoughts and actions, we trust that He will remove them and guide us into merciful thoughts, words, and deeds. And then we, like the disciples on that mountaintop, seeing and knowing God's mercy, will have a glimpse of His kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. By accepting His mercy, we will be humbly empowered to bring forth the kingdom of heaven, and as we do, we will show mercy to every person we meet.